The man's hands worked slowly, carefully, unwinding the thick vines that had ensnared the baby gorilla's limbs. With each tug, he could feel the small body tremble, the effort it took for the young gorilla to breathe, the panic that would seize it every time the vines tightened. The man's own pulse quickened, the weight of the situation settling on him like the humidity of the forest itself. He could sense the life force of the gorilla flickering faintly, but it wasn't enough yet. The baby wasn't strong enough to escape on its own, and there was no sign of any adults, no mother, no other members of the troop. It was just the two of them now, the man and the fragile life in his hands. The vines loosened one by one, the baby gorilla's legs freed, but still it lay there weak, its chest rising and falling in slow, labored breaths. The man carefully gathered it into his arms, the small body surprisingly light, its fur matted with dirt and sweat. The gorilla's soft whimpers became quieter, its body stiff with exhaustion, but it didn't pull away. There was a moment of hesitation. Was the baby gorilla too terrified to trust him? Or was it too weak to resist? He held it close, his own breath steadying as he spoke, in a voice that seemed to belong only to this moment, to this silent exchange of life and care. "It's all right," he whispered again, his voice low and steady, more for comfort than command. He knew it wouldn't understand the words, but the tone, calm and soft, seemed to reach the young gorilla's senses. The forest was silent around them. The birds, the insects, even the wind seemed to still. The world outside this fragile cocoon of rescue and survival was distant. There was only the man, the baby gorilla, and the trust they were beginning to form. As he held the baby, the man could feel the slight tremor in its body begin to subside. The tiny animal's eyes, wide with confusion just moments ago, began to soften, the panic easing with each steady, gentle movement of the man. The baby's breath grew slower, its body no longer rigid, but instead relaxed, the exhaustion of its struggle taking its toll. The man stayed still, rocking gently, offering the safety the baby needed without overwhelming it. The weight of the forest around them pressed in, but the connection between them, fragile and tentative as it was, held stronger than the space between them. The baby's eyes fluttered closed for a moment, the calm settling over it like a blanket, and the man allowed himself a small breath of relief. He wasn't certain of what would happen next. He wasn't sure if the mother would return or if the troop would find them. But for now, he had bought them time. The baby gorilla's chest rose and fell slowly, now softer, quieter. The man knew they couldn't stay here long. The forest was no place for a baby left alone for too long, and if the mother returned and found them, there would be no way of knowing how she would react. The next step was to get the baby to safety, and that was his only focus now. But as the man stood, cradling the fragile creature in his arms, he couldn't shake the quiet certainty that the forest held its breath, waiting for the next chapter of this quiet story to unfold. The baby's breaths grew softer, its small body sinking deeper into the earth as exhaustion took hold. Each inhale came slower than the last, the rhythm of life slipping away with every weak movement the gorilla made. Its eyes darted around the savannah, scanning the unfamiliar landscape in confusion, but there was no longer the pleading, desperate look that had been there before. Now, there was only a quiet acceptance, as if it had surrendered to whatever would come next. The man's heart tightened, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He had managed to free the baby from the vines that held it captive, But that was only the first step. The reality now was clear. The baby was too small, too frail to survive without help. It could not be moved far enough to safety by his hands alone. The man's mind raced, sifting through options. Could he somehow carry the baby to a safe location? Could he tend to its injuries here, alone in the savannah, with no tools or medical supplies at hand? The answers eluded him. His thoughts tangled in the urgency of the situation. But the conclusion was undeniable. What the baby needed now wasn't just protection. It needed expert care, and the only way to provide that was through backup. There was no time to lose. With trembling hands, he reached into his pack and pulled out the radio, his fingers momentarily lingering on the buttons. He exhaled deeply before speaking into the device. His voice was steady, but there was a faint edge of urgency that slipped through. "Ranger 12, this is Base. I've found a baby gorilla. It's weak, possibly injured. I'm alone and need assistance urgently." He waited, listening to the static on the other end. The silence seemed to grow louder, stretching the minutes as he glanced down at the baby. Its small chest rose and fell with each laborious breath, the fragile life hanging in the balance. The man's thoughts raced again, desperately calculating how long it might take for help to arrive, but there was no answer in the waiting. He repeated the message, his voice more insistent this time. Every second felt like an eternity, the savannah around him heavy with the knowledge that time was slipping away. Finally, the radio crackled to life. "We're on our way, Ranger 12. Hold on." The relief that flooded through him was palpable, but it did little to ease the gnawing fear that still gripped his chest. The baby's life hung in the balance, and despite the promise of help, the minutes stretched endlessly before him. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. The baby needed attention now. The man remained at the baby's side, his eyes never leaving the tiny form. He whispered gentle reassurances, though he knew the words held little power. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice barely a breath in the stillness. The baby shifted slightly, its eyes still wide, but there was something different now. A faint flicker of trust seemed to pass between them. The young gorilla didn't pull away, didn't flinch as the man's hand hovered near its trembling body. It was a quiet, fragile connection, one that made the man feel both grateful and powerless. His role was so small in the grand scheme of things, yet in this moment it was everything. The air around them felt still, as if the entire savannah had paused to listen. Time seemed to stretch as the man sat there, hand gently resting near the baby's side, hoping that every second of calmness might help. The rhythmic breathing of the young gorilla, though weak, was steady for now, and that steadiness brought him a small sense of hope. He wasn't sure how long it would take for help to arrive, but he remained there, silent and steady, as the savannah hummed around them. The man remained crouched beside the baby gorilla, aware of the precious seconds slipping by, but also acutely mindful that any sudden movements might disrupt the fragile bond they shared in this tense moment. The savannah around them, once filled with the familiar hum of distant calls and the rustling of the wind through the grass, seemed to have grown still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The only sound was the shallow, irregular breathing of the young gorilla beneath his palm, the slight tremors of its body, a reminder of the struggle it had just endured. His hand rested lightly on the small form, providing what comfort he could, though he knew it wasn't enough. The absence of the baby's mother weighed heavily in the air. No signs of any other gorillas, no movement in the tall grass that might suggest the protective presence of its family. Only the hum of the distant savanna life filled the quiet, a constant that seemed far removed from the immediate urgency of the moment. Then, as though responding to the stillness, the air shifted. The man's eyes caught a subtle movement, a ripple through the grass, barely noticeable, but enough to pull his attention. His body tensed, breath catching in his chest. He turned his head ever so slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace around him. A shape began to emerge from the tall grasses, moving with deliberate slowness. The lioness appeared, her golden coat blending almost seamlessly with the sunlit savanna, her powerful form barely discernible against the sweeping backdrop of earth and sky. She stood at the edge of the clearing, watching him with a focused intensity that sent a quiet shiver down his spine. Her gaze was fixed not on him, but on the baby gorilla, the small body so vulnerable in its weakened state. The air seemed to thicken with her presence, the weight of her scrutiny pressing down on the man. She was not close, but the force of her gaze made it feel as though she was right beside him. The man froze, his body instinctively locking into place as he sensed the gravity of the moment. The lioness did not charge, nor did she retreat. She stood still, a steady, powerful presence, her eyes locked on the baby gorilla with an intensity that was both calculating and calm. There was no threat in her posture, no sign of aggression, but the alertness in her stance was unmistakable. Her body was poised, her muscles tensed beneath her sleek, golden coat, ready for any shift in the situation. Her presence was not one of immediate danger, but of quiet intent. She was watching, assessing, waiting. The man could feel her power, an undeniable force in the silent exchange, as though the balance between vulnerability and strength hung delicately in the air. The tension stretched between them, a silent dialogue taking place in the shared space of the clearing. The lioness, a mother in her own right, seemed to recognize the vulnerability of the young gorilla. Yet there was no sign of instinctual aggression, only the careful observation of a creature who had learned to assess and protect. The man's breath quickened ever so slightly, the weight of the moment pressing in on him. He knew that, despite his human intervention, he was not the only protector here. The savannah was full of its own laws, where power and survival were defined in quiet, measured ways. The lioness, too, was a mother, and her protective instincts, while directed elsewhere, still carried a weight of meaning. For a long moment, the lioness did not move, her eyes unwavering. The man remained still, his heart beating a little faster now, but his body calm, aware that the smallest movement could alter everything. It was a reminder, stark and real, of the delicate balance that existed in the wild, a world where every creature, no matter how powerful, was always on guard, always ready to protect. He could feel the tension between them, the shared understanding of what it meant to be vulnerable in a world so filled with both beauty and danger. The man did not move, his gaze fixed on the lioness as she slowly took a step forward. Her golden eyes never wavered from his, steady and watchful. Yet there was something different now, something softer. The tension that had once filled the air began to ease, and a quiet understanding seemed to pass between them, unspoken but palpable. The man couldn't know for certain whether she was the cub's mother or if she was simply curious about the baby's presence, but there was a quiet certainty in the way she approached. It wasn't aggression that drove her movements, nor was it fear. It was something else, something ancient and deeply ingrained in the wild. She was assessing the situation, taking in the infant's condition, silently determining whether it needed protection or if it should be left to find its way. The lioness moved with an almost imperceptible grace, her muscles rippling beneath her tawny coat as she drew closer. Every movement was deliberate, careful. Her eyes, once sharp with the instinct of a predator, were now filled with a different kind of focus. An assessment, yes, but also an awareness of the delicate balance of life around her. She moved towards the baby with a quiet determination, her body language calm yet resolute. There was no hesitation in her steps, only a deep understanding of the space between them, of the man, of the baby, of the wild. The tension in the air thickened with every step she took, yet there was no sudden rush or aggression. Instead, the lioness moved forward until she was standing just a few feet from the baby, the two of them almost within reach of one another. The man's heart pounded quietly in his chest, but he remained still, respecting the lioness's careful approach. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him, but he did not dare break the fragile stillness. He had done what he could. Now it was up to the wild. The lioness's head lowered slightly, and she sniffed the air, her breath gentle and measured. It was a quiet gesture, subtle, but it seemed to carry with it an unspoken message. Her nose brushed the baby's fur, and for a moment there was a fragile silence, as if the very world held its breath. The lioness nudged the baby with her nose, the motion soft but strong, a gesture of reassurance. There was no aggression in the nudge, no need to dominate or chase. It was simply an invitation to trust, to know that she was there, that she recognized the cub's presence in the world. It was an act of quiet strength and compassion, one that carried the weight of everything the wild had taught her. The baby stirred at the touch, its tiny body reacting to the presence of this new, powerful companion. It was a delicate moment, the kind of moment that could have gone any number of ways. But instead of pulling away, the baby remained still, its body slowly calming in the lioness's presence. The man held his breath, watching carefully, not wanting to intrude on the delicate interaction. He had done what he could for the baby, but now it was up to the forces of the wild to guide it. The lioness's soft breath against the baby's fur seemed to ease the cub's fear, and for the first time since the man had found it, the baby looked less uncertain, more willing to trust. In that fleeting moment, there was a subtle but profound shift. The baby, once fragile and unsure, began to relax under the lioness's quiet watch. There was no violence, no rush to claim or control. Instead, the lioness's calm presence spoke louder than any words ever could. Her focus was no longer on the man, but on the baby. She was a protector, a quiet guardian of the wild's fragile rhythm. The baby had found, for the first time, a moment of peace in its confusion. The man stood back, his role now complete. There was no need to intervene further. The wild had taken its course, and in the quiet trust shared between the lioness and the baby, a new chapter was unfolding. The baby, no longer just a helpless creature, was learning to navigate the complexities of its world. And as the lioness nudged the baby one last time before slowly moving away, the man felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that, in this moment, he had witnessed something rare and precious, a silent bond of understanding between two beings in the wild. The lioness's nudge was gentle but firm, a quiet strength that spoke volumes, her head lowered slightly, her warm, steady presence surrounding the baby gorilla as it slowly lifted its head. The baby's movements were unsteady, its body still weak from the ordeal, but there was a flicker of something more, strength, or perhaps hope. The small grunt it made, low and faint, was followed by the hesitant rise of its legs, trembling slightly but holding steady as it found its balance. The lioness remained close, her body language radiating calm and reassurance, her eyes soft as she watched the baby struggle to its feet. Her instinct was clear. This was her charge, her responsibility, and no amount of weakness would deter her from seeing it through. The man, who had been kneeling beside them, stepped back slowly. He gave the lioness the space she needed to care for her cub. There was no urgency now, no rush. The animal world had its own rhythm, its own way of restoring balance, and he understood that his role, though important in those initial moments, was now complete. The lioness was the true caregiver, the true protector, and she had taken charge in a way that was both fierce and tender. He knew that his presence, though once necessary, was no longer required. The wild had reclaimed its space, and now it was time for the lioness to lead her cub back to the world they belonged to. The baby gorilla, still fragile, sought the lioness's support. Its small form leaned against her, searching for something solid, something that would keep it grounded in this world. The lioness stood tall, her body unwavering, as if to say, "I am here, you are safe." With another soft nudge, this time more decisive, she guided the baby to its feet once again. This time there was more confidence, more stability in its stance. The baby, though still uncertain, seemed to recognize the safety that came from being in its mother's presence. There was no need for any grand gestures, no overwhelming show of affection. The simple act of standing together was enough. In the silence between them, the bond of mother and child, though unspoken, was clear. The man watched quietly from a distance, his heart full but calm. The air felt lighter now, the tension of earlier moments dissipating with the soft rhythm of the lioness's movements. She led her cub away from the clearing, their steps slow but steady as they began their journey back to the wild. The savannah, vast and unbroken, seemed to breathe with them, the weight of the moment lifting as the two animals moved together in the direction they were always meant to go. The land itself, timeless and patient, held the rhythm of their departure, a quiet witness to this simple but profound moment. The man stood still, his chest tight with emotion, yet there was no sadness, only a deep, quiet sense of relief. His role in their journey was over, and he understood that now the savannah, with its endless rhythms and cycles, would carry them forward. The lioness and her cub would find their place in the wild, where they belonged. It wasn't an end, but a return to the life they had always known, a life that required no intervention, no human touch. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest help is allowing the wild to heal itself. As the lioness and her cub slowly moved into the distance, the man exhaled softly, the quiet sounds of the savannah surrounding him. The wind shifted gently, carrying with it the soft rustling of the grasses and the distant calls of birds. There was no need for words now, no need for further action. The moment had passed, but its meaning lingered in the air, soft and silent. The bond between the lioness and her cub, the quiet strength of the wild, would stay with him long after they disappeared into the tall grass. It was a departure, yes, but one filled with hope and the quiet certainty that the wild had once again restored itself,